Welcome to Status Secure, the weekly cyber threat briefing for executives who refuse to operate in the blind. Hosted by the Watcher 6 Collective, uniting former Army Special Forces and Naval Special Warfare Communications operators, alongside an industry-leading CISO nominated for Cybersecurity Woman of the World. We cut through the noise and give you the operational intelligence you need for mission success in a hostile digital environment. The enemy is listening. Is your status secure? Welcome back to Status Secure. Today's briefing is about the new face of financial theft. 10 years ago, phishing was easy to spot. Broken English, a Nigerian prince trying to share a fortune. But today, phishing is a precise, strategic delivery vector for B2B financial ruin. It doesn't look like spam anymore. It looks like your client, your vendor, or your managing partner. It is a surging epidemic that is getting completely out of hand because we have mistaken convenience for security. But what happens when the convenient email you trust is actually a customized digital weapon aimed directly at your client's capital? What do you think, CISO?
So, I guess we should kind of explain, because this isn't new, right? People have been doing phishing email scams now for as long as, emails emails have been around. So it's not new. I mean, what's new is probably that it's what they call high-fidelity phishing, right? And so in modern B2B, where, it's it's just the beginning. It's trying to be actually get to be man in the middle. So, there's a lot of, they always come up with terminology for stuff and, and so one of the things they call it now is business email compromise, but it's basically, trying to simulate emails, doing that, supply chain phishing, trying to not just get the folks in your organization, but folks in your vendor, your supply chain organization, right? And so they're trying to get those vendors so that way they can become man in the middle and then, compromise and intercept invoices, right? So, we always talk about this. This never changes, right? People are kind of like your first line of defense. You have some control over the people in your organization. You can train them. You can put signs up. You can, on their screensavers, you can put messages to remind them, right? To make it always forefront in their thoughts. But you can't control your vendors, their staff and what they're doing to educate or protect their staff from these types of sophisticated phishing scams, right? And so once you have an incompetent user that clicks a bad link, and they're not from your company, they're not your organization, they're a vendor's company, right? Now they have information that they might be able to use, and they deploy tools, right? So MFA bypass kits that make the fraudulent email undistinguishable from a real one. So now you're getting emails from your vendors that look like they're real, an invoice from your vendor that says you need to pay. This is our new routing number. Send a couple $100,000 here. So that's where they've headed now, because they know that that's actually, if they send 1,001 and the invoice is, a couple $100,000 or even $50,000, they've just made money and it's not that expensive for them.
Yeah, what this reminds me of is when I was doing some of my training in the military, and I would imagine, and I've sat in this boat of, I think of hackers, maybe people who aren't in the industry per se, right? They might think of hackers as like, oh, this crazy world out there on cyberspace, and they do all these fancy things that can like hack into these things, and they don't really understand what they're talking about, but maybe we assume it's a lot more complicated than it needs to be, right? And one of the things we trained on was, yeah, there are those complicated ways to maybe get into things that you're trying to get into. However, if you can just, what they would talk about is you can get your hands on a computer, you can get your hands on their stuff, then you win, right? And so, yes, while maybe the nefarious actors have these super cool hacking techniques that they're trying over here, but on this hand, they're also trying a lot more simple things, what we call social engineering. And this kind of world that we're talking about today reminds me a lot of that, which is I show up to your house wearing a UPS outfit. You think I'm the UPS guy. You give me your package or I give you a package. I'm totally trusted. You open your door. I can look in your house. Maybe I come in, you invite me in. I ask for a drink of water, whatever, a lemonade. I come in the house. I get to scope your security in your residential home. I can see when you're home, who answers the door, who's there during the day, who's not there during the day, and find the vulnerabilities. And then, now I have access and later I can come in because now I know. And you didn't know, you are none the wiser, right? That is a lot easier of a way to get in than like trying to sneak in, not knowing the information, sneak in at night when all the security systems are up and running in everyone's home. And that's a lot more of a complicated scenario than just walking in the front door because I got invited in because I'm wearing an outfit that says I'm legit. And that's what this is. And so this is also the best way for them to win, right? Because if you click my link and my link leads to a payment gateway and you put in your information and pay it, I didn't have to hack anything. I didn't have to do anything. You voluntarily showed up to my doorstep and gave me your money. So that's a very easy win for me. Right. And this is going back to the Stryker cyber attack we discussed on episode 8 last week. Well, again, I was at that conference, and when I was talking to one of the representatives from Stryker, they were talking about it was almost like what I would imagine like a brute force attack, but like via email phishing. It was like one after another, after another, after another, after another. And they were so like annoyed with it. It was like, oh my gosh, they just keep coming and keep coming. And I would imagine if you're the company doing that, you just spam these phishing emails because even though, 1,000 of them people are smart against and they can spot it and say, no, there might be that one that slips through the cracks and they win just by so much volume is kind of what it sounded like to me. So on that note, I guess when we hear about what you talked about, someone actually inserting themselves as a middleman, right, in between a live transaction or somehow they know the information that there's about to be an email from a vendor to someone in that supply chain saying it's ready for me to get payment. And then they do that. I guess the question is how is that happening? Or I would look at it and go, how do they know that there may be a payment already waiting, right? Like because I can understand how they can get the contact information and send the email and all that. But how do they know that there's already a payment happening that they can jump in on?
Yeah, let's talk about Stryker as an example. So, I mean, it's been tied to to an organization that is upset about, what's happening in Iran, right? And so, but let's say it wasn't that. Let's just say it was some other malicious actor who didn't want to cause chaos, but wanted money. They compromised the admin credentials. Instead of doing anything, they could just sit there, put some tools on the network and sit there and watch for session tokens because now they can just sit there and monitor, right? They're doing surveillance. They're finding out, okay, who's in finance, who sends out invoices. And then what they'll do is they'll put the tools in and they'll wait for them to, actually be discussing a upcoming invoice. And then when they actually send the invoice, they'll intercept it. And they'll just modify the invoice details a little bit. Maybe add a paragraph that says, hey, we apologize for the inconvenience, but we've had to, we've needed to change our routing and our banking account for, due to some malicious activity. How ironic. And so now the unsuspecting, customer, right, has gotten emails from this person before, knows that they're the person who sends invoices, was expecting the invoice, right? And of course, why would they not follow the instructions from their vendor? Right. So that's where it gets very sophisticated and, and it's hard because they're already in your network. They're already using like tools that, you may not be looking for because they're using like very advanced tools that sometimes, it's hard for security teams. And we all know this. It's hard for security teams to keep up with everything that like the threat landscape is always changing. And if you have to go and ask for budget, I don't know, for those of you out there who've ever had to go and ask for security budget, you know how hard that is. So until something happens, it's hard to get budget to put in a new tool to monitor for this new threat, right? So it's it's a challenge. You don't want it to happen, but then you can't afford all the latest security tools. So it's a real thing. It happens. Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess on that, let's talk about the liability of when it happens. So if, let's say, a client's funds are stolen because someone in the finance or whoever accepted the wire transfer request from an intercepted invoice thread without whatever the verification process would be. Maybe it doesn't, they did it, click the button, they hit send. So what does that look like? Is this a technology failure? Is it a fiduciary sort of issue? Like, is it gross negligence? Like, I don't know. What is it, in your experience from what you've seen, what happens from a liability standpoint?
So we talked about this before, which is, reasonable care, right? Because that's what regulators, they're going to take a look at. First, you have a couple of issues. First, your customer is going to want their money back. That's the first thing. They're like, hey, this email came from your organization. It was fraud. We want our money back. So you're going to have to deal with that. Hopefully your cyber liability insurance will cover it. So make sure you know what your cyber liability insurance covers. But that's the first thing you're going to have to deal with. The next thing is, of course, the courts and regulators. And so they're going to come, what they're going to do is they're going to investigate. Did you do reasonable care? Right. Sending an email with routing information. Like, did you put in safeguards with your clients, right? Asking them to, like, if they get any changes in your financial accounting, to, pick up a phone and verify that change. Like, those are the kind of things that they're going to ask for. Sometimes speed. Some organizations will be like, well, that's an additional step. That takes time, right? And you're relying on, like, a step that maybe your client doesn't want. Like, they're like, what do you mean? I got an invoice from you. Now I have to call you to make sure that invoice is valid. What's going on? Right. So, sometimes they don't want to do that, but you're compromising security for speed. Right. And unfortunately, in the courts, they don't care about speed. They care about, hey, you didn't do everything you could to protect your clients from fraud and yourself.
Yeah. And so on that note, let's discuss what our marching orders would be for those listening this week. Obviously, we can't just stop using email, though there are ways for some companies, for certain ways people provide services that they can, capture money in a different way. However, a lot of people are still relying on email. We also can't tolerate total vulnerability in terms of the phishing attacks and just kind of not paying attention, right? So what are some good action items, some steps that, somebody could implement after listening to this week with their team to be better about this, to prevent something like this from happening to them?
Good question. I would say right away, we talked about it a little bit, enforce out-of-band voice verification for every single wiring instruction. I know it's, a lot of financial people be like, yeah, but that's a lot of work. Are you talking every single? Like, what about for small amounts? Well, you want to do that anyways, because if they start getting small amounts, they can add up. So, and plus you want to train your clients and yourself, like, this is the process, right? This is the process. The sooner you do it, the more you do it, the more that just becomes standard procedure, right? You need some way to verify payments before actually sending the wire transfer. That's number one. Number two, look at your authentication infrastructure, right? So email security shouldn't belong in IT. It needs to belong in security, right? Because a lot of organizations, they consider email, that's part of technology, the technology stack. So it's usually in an infrastructure team and not a security team. Make sure you're putting in like advanced threat protection. A lot of security folks are used to DLP, email DLP, data loss protection. That's a good way, because if somebody's sending, maybe you say that, account information is not going to be allowed to be sent through email. So your DLP will pick it up, send it over to security for review, and then security will be like, yeah, that's a routing instructions. That's not allowed. And they'll just kill that email before it even gets out. And also, enforce strict MFA for, to monitor for account takeovers. So you just have to, These are pretty common known security measures. Make sure you actually implement them, though.
Got it. So the perimeter is no longer just your network, right? It is the embedded software and internal controls that manage your client's capital. When your transaction is networked, your responsibility is also networked. So our mission success today is about asset integrity. So let's go ahead and execute to that standard. And that's it for today's episode. So we'll catch you guys next week. Mission success isn't about luck. It's about preparation. You've heard the intel. Now, go put it to use. If you need to verify your security posture, I've established a secure line at watcher6.com/secure. Go there to get the briefing the enemy doesn't want you to have. We'll see you next week. Until then, keep your head on a swivel.